All right. Hey, everybody, and welcome back. I am joined here today with Igor Jablokov. So Igor is the founder and CEO of Pryon, an artificial intelligence company delivering an enterprise knowledge management platform. Pryon's natural language processing engine ingests and transforms data into experiences that solve critical business challenges. Previously at IBM, Igor grew impatient with the gap between the invention and commercialization of AI and departed to establish cloud computing pioneer Yap. 5 years later, Amazon acquired the company for its AI expertise and machine learning technology, now embedded in billions of AI-powered devices powered by Alexa. Igor was subsequently awarded Eisenhower and Truman National Security Fellowships to leverage entrepreneurial ecosystems in addressing geopolitical concerns. Igor also passionately supports STEM career and educational opportunities. As such, he's a Techstars Alexa Accelerator mentor, was a Blackstone NC entrepreneur in residence, and founder of Global Shapers, a program in the World Economic Forum. And of course, he's here today at Hacklytics to engage with young entrepreneurs and technologists here today. So once again, Igor, we're so excited to have you. And yeah, please take it away.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Let me go ahead and just share my screen real quick. That way, it's always more fun to share a story with some visual aids. So, look, before you can shape your future with AI, you have to first shape your past with AI. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a hint in terms of a background of how some of the things that you interact with day to day came to be. And that way, you can actually feel pretty good about, what you've done up to this point and what you're about to do after this point as well. And so that way, hopefully I can share with you some humble beginnings that match the start of your lives as well. So look, I was born in Greece. Both my parents were artists. And so the place on the left is where I used to live. And it literally was a cave by the water. And my mother essentially sketched or painted. I think that's a watercolor on the right side, and that's where I used to live.
Hey, Igor, I'm not sure if your screen is being shared with us right now. Could you double check and make sure that it's up?
Yeah, it's let me see here. It says StreamYard is sharing your screen right now.
Okay, because I'm not able to see it on the stream right now.
Okay, let me stop. Let me try again.
Yeah.
Boom. Share screen. Your entire screen. Boom, boom. Okay, there you go. Now can you see it?
Yes, now we're up.
Okay. All right. So hopefully the verbal depiction that I gave you, I'm not sure what you are imagining, but now you get to see it. Does everybody see it now? So on the pictures on the left is a picture of what it actually looked like. On the right was a depiction that my mother painted. So you can see that. Okay. All right. So now here's a kicker. So what would you expect would come to your front door if you lived right by the sea? Well, it was dolphins. And so if I have to think about some of the things that were inspiring from my early youth, it's asking the what if question. What if I could talk to the dolphins? What would they be telling me? And so that was my first experience imagining machine translation. What tool would exist that would allow me to talk to these creatures? And yes, my cousin is a sci-fi writer, and literally wrote a book on people talking to these things. But I am literally trying to make it happen in real life. When I moved to the U.S., my grandfather, I moved in with him. And he was a watchmaker. And so day after day, night after night, I would see him hunched over these mechanical things. And so relatively complex things don't appear that complex, right? It's just a thing that you do step by step by step, and then you end up accomplishing great things, just like all of you have already up to this point as well of your educations. And so just being in this environment, right? So think, creativity, but then also creativity around complex machines has been interesting. And so when I came to the US, not speaking English, they set one of these style of computers in front of me because I took a shine messing around with these machines in primary school, and I just started tapping away and figuring it out. I will say that most of you probably have never seen a tape drive before. That's where you used to store your programs, and that thing would gobble my programs. I could never get it to save right or restore right. So I don't know if it was the quality of cassettes that I had or what, but I had to manually, keep typing in my basic programs from Hatch every time. And then one summer, my parents threw me in a monastery for my brother and I to learn how to paint and how to essentially, work on a farm and things of that sort. And there was no electricity and things like that there. And I remember by candlelight actually reading a book that also, blew my mind as well. And it was Asimov's Foundation. And I'm like, hold on a second. You're telling me with all of these computer programs and math and all of these things that I was learning, we can predict the future? That's interesting. And that's and that got tucked in the back of my mind. At the same time, I was voraciously reading all sorts of, computing magazines and things like that. While maybe some of my contemporaries had, pictures of cars and planes and things like that, on their bedroom walls. I had Seymour Cray, being, somebody who I idolized and everything that they did to, spur supercomputing. And so that was a solid foundation for my interest in STEM as a creative tool, not just something there that you go in there and mechanically do something, but as something, of consequence. And so similar to all of you, I ended up in a university that, had a lot of opportunities for all of us as younger science and engineering types. In my case, it was Penn State because originally I thought I was going to be a nuclear engineering candidate because I was excited about some of the work that was happening in that field, and so they had an on-campus reactor, so I thought that would be fun. They also had a lab where they were working on hydrodynamics and things like torpedoes and submarine hulls and things of that sort. That was fascinating. Nobody knew that the largest water tunnel in the Western world was actually hidden in the middle of these farmland. And then lastly, again, based on the access that all of you have, there was this getaway special program that JPL and NASA and Lockheed Martin were doing, where we got to put little experiments on the space shuttle that went up. In my case, it was radiation effects on semiconductors. So anyway, started as a nuclear engineering candidate, but then went over to computer engineering because I felt, look, if I cared about energy, if I cared about medicine, if I cared about, finance, computers were going to underpin everything. So it would give me a lot more career, freedom of action if I actually migrated over to that. And that's what led me to IBM. Now, IBM today, somebody telling you that, sometimes you'll chuckle because it feels like a conservative and state organization. But remember, back then there was no Salesforce, there was no ServiceNow, there was no Facebook, there was no Google, there was no Amazon. I mean, it was all of those things combined, right? And what was really exciting about that company is it had hardware, software, services, and you basically got experience not just in the US in terms of how people were using technologies, but all over the world. It was a different place back then, and it was one of the place that if you were a top graduate, you were looking to go there. Which is a little bit hilarious because if you actually look at IBM research, the people that ended up going to work at Google and a mess of these other startups were the people that quote unquote weren't good enough to work at IBM, which is hilarious, right? Because talk about a really nice chip on your shoulder being put on there. Now, as the introduction said, I started getting frustrated, right? That things were not developing as fast as they can, and so in Popular Mechanics, they were interviewing me, and they said, "Hey, what's one thing that you think is going to be possible with AI?" And I said, "Look, I'd like to talk to my television because this is stupid to use this remote control. I can just talk to it and say, 'Hey, switch to CNN,' or find me an interesting documentary on dolphins, or fun things like this." And what really ticked me off is they put my quote inside of this magazine, but they labeled it American 2025. And I got angry. I tossed the magazine across the room when I saw that, because I already had this stuff in the lab, right? It's hard to see, from where you are, but this is May 2005 in the bottom left corner. And so I'm like, holy smokes, these people think it's going to take 20 years to do this. What am I going to be in, like a hover wheelchair? When this stuff is born, like Professor X? No, I want this born now. And then IBM was working on a project with Toshiba and Sony called the PlayStation 3, and I was really excited about it. So I went to him and I said, "Hey, let's hide a microphone. Let's hide a microphone in that thing. People can just talk to it, and now I can get that thing that I just talked about, in everybody's living room." Well, guess what? They were falling out of their chairs laughing, saying, "Nobody's going to have a microphone in their house. That's crazy talk." And then the following year, I said, "Oh my gosh, I can free up the budget, the compute budget on this device, so there's more available to the games developers if we actually put all the speech recognition in the cloud." They were laughing some more, saying, What are you, crazy? People don't have broadband, and nobody's going to allow their speech patterns to be installed up on a cloud." And in the third year, I went to that investment review board and I said, "Hey, if I can get this cloud-based speech recognition, not only can I people do command and control of the device, I can answer any question any human has about anything." And by then, their minds were blown. Think about that emoji with the mind blown. That's exactly what was coming out of their ears and at the top of their head. They couldn't fathom what it was. So I ended up leaving, did my startup, and started working on it in secret. Now, I was the first Twitter user, I think, in the Carolinas, maybe, one of the first Twitter users in the whole Southeast. This is the first ever spoken tweet. So I literally said it out loud. It's alive. Of course, I'm going to choose something from Frankenstein, right? Because my first name's Igor and my brother's name is Victor. And so that's what the first spoken tweet ever was. And nobody knew, what we were working on. Now, at the first ever TechCrunch conference, I held baby Alexa in my hand, and everybody was scratching their head, not knowing what the heck I was talking about. I thought it was cuter than Baby Yoda at the time, but one of the things that I couldn't talk about is that we were secretly working with Apple in parallel on a prototype iPhone. That's how early, before Siri even existed, that they were thinking about natural language interfaces on top of mobile devices as well. So credit to them, for some of their early work. Once they launched Siri, then the whole industry got why this was going to be a big deal. So in 2011, we disappeared. Nobody knew where we went. And I guess in 2014 is when people then ended up seeing the Amazon Echo for the first time. Now, when my R&D team was assigned the Amazon Echo and the Fire Phone, they were really excited about the Fire Phone, thinking that they would challenge Apple's iPhone, and they were depressed working on the Amazon Echo because they're like, "What's this weird coffee can looking thing? That doesn't look like anybody would care about it." The complete opposite happened. The thing that they thought would be successful flopped. The thing that they thought would flop ended up being in 100 million kitchens a few years later. So that was really exciting. And then IBM eventually caught up with the Watson project that some of my former colleagues worked on, and actually some of the folks that are in this company as well. And yes, it does feel very surreal that this thing is like in every nook and cranny now, in all sorts of different incarnations. And yes, I do sometimes think, is it always, doing something positive for us, or does it get a little bit weird on the margins when these big tech companies use it? But I have to say, if you think about the origins of a lot of this AI stuff, at IBM Research and similar labs, and I know the Google research folks are working on this topic, and many other companies. At first, we really thought about it as an accessibility tool, right? So, Brooke Ellison, pictured here, is just a fantastic person. She's the first to ever handicapped graduate of an Ivy League school. Christopher Reeve, the original Superman, did a TV movie about her life based on her book. And think about somebody like that with those challenges that still, puncture through, got a PhD, is now a professor at Stony Brook, and is a brilliant person, but was aided by all these types of assisted technologies. So, that's pretty easy to chalk up that this is a positive use of technology. The other thing is the fact that AI can organize chaos, and just make it a lot more efficient for you guys to have knowledge acquisition in a way that we never could, having to go to physical libraries. Now, why are so many companies, including the folks that some of you may end up going to work for in the early parts of your careers, really care about what's happening in AI? Well, I mean, they're seeing nonstop, discussions about what the future of work is going to be and what their place in that future is going to be, whether they're going to survive and thrive it. And they're also worried. They don't want to be an example of a brand that essentially went out of business because they weren't able to adapt to changing conditions. And what's interesting is the lifespan of companies has never been shorter. If you actually look at when the S&P 500 was founded, almost 90% of those companies that were in that first batch just disappeared. They weren't able to adapt to changing market conditions and technological conditions as well. As things went from industrialization to information age, and information age to the intelligence age now. So that's why they're paying attention. And so, what does that mean for the future of work? Do we all get replaced by robots? I don't think so. If you actually look at the people that still maintain their jobs through these transitions, they're the ones that essentially, like you all have been essentially wargaming through this weekend. How to use these technologies to be more effective and have a force multiplier in your own creativity, insights, and the like, where I think you're still going to be in the center of decision making. But at the same time, we have to be worried, about things like, how we're affecting, the youth that are, getting influenced with this stuff with recommendation engines, and whether or not they should even have access to some of these technologies at age 13, or should we just say, here's a violin, here's a paintbrush, go figure out how to be human first, without having, these undue influences from the outside, when you're supposed to be, the most valuable thing you can do is figure out how to be a human, not, figure out how to be a consumer of content. And then, as we all have seen, all sorts of nonsense with disinformation and influencing folks, to care about algorithms and ensure that there's no bias in these things, especially in highly regulated and sensitive use cases, which is why the Biden administration has started thinking about, well, maybe there needs to be a national, credit rating that is highly regulated, instead of allowing the private sector to control that. All of the things that you guys have heard, vis-a-vis facial recognition and all of the issues that come into it. Biases that show up in different automated recruiting tools as well, which is a big risk. So this technology is not ready for prime time at all. All for how new drugs get discovered. I mean, there's nonsense out there that you can look at certain um, medicines that are targeted towards women that have never been tested on women, which is ridiculous based on the data sets that existed. And so there's these types of challenges to be overcome, and the fact that there's not enough of us to go around. to solve all of these challenges. Now, way back when, I will say one of the great books that I would make part of my library if I was you is Michael Kanan's new book called T minus AI. Mike is the current chairperson of AI at the U.S. Air Force, and he wrote a fantastic book that describes the origins of AI and where it's going. And in there, he talks about how worried that Eisenhower was that we as a nation did not have enough capacity to solve some of the problems that he was saying with, in this case, ICBMs and the space race. And so he passed the National Defense Education Act in order to create incentives for more people, to adopt a STEM-centered education. And I think that's something that we need to figure out ourselves, because of the fact that AI and great power competition is going to be entangled. In fact, just a couple of days ago, I shot a video for South by Southwest together with Lieutenant Colonel Vinman, talking about the quote unquote existential threat of whoever is going to have the fastest AI and what that can mean to unlocking doors and essentially, hurling fleets of drones into battle space. That's all the scary stuff, the bias stuff, the warfare and all of that disinformation and affecting children's lives. Let's talk about the good stuff, right? What's some of the good stuff that this technology can do, right? Going forward. Well, it's going to be really cool for all of us to have a kit, right? And especially with the newest Tesla S and X revisions that were recently announced, right? So, if you're below a certain age, car wrecks are the biggest thing that could affect you, from a lifespan perspective. And so, if that's true, from a probabilistic standpoint, having a car that can drive itself is going to be a lot more helpful. Now, the problem is with the way that we do these cars, is that we need probably dedicated roads. That's what they're doing in China. Here, our cars have to figure themselves out amongst the 99% of cars that are going to be driven by humans as well, and that presents a much harder problem. But that's something that's going to be improving over time as well, to create all forms of new structures, that also maximize their energy efficiency and things like that. That's certainly a positive use. All sorts of new energy, right? Now, look at these wind turbines, right? So, some lobbyist for the coal industry is going to tell you, oh my gosh, these things are slicing and dicing birds, migrating birds and things like that. Well, guess what? Machine learning is learning about these types of things and already tempering these devices where they're able to reduce the incidence of those style of accidents, just based on the patterns that these devices are learning from their environment as well. And so there's just going to be a mess of applications in every industry possible in terms of how you're going to be affected. And certainly that's obvious with the fact that many of you over the course of this weekend have been doing different combinations of hey, virus related analytics as well. The reason why we were able to get the vaccines as efficiently as we can is just the amount of firepower that was thrown to this problem with a lot of these modern AI methods as well. I'm personally optimistic. I think none of you would be in the program that you're in if you weren't optimistic that with your bare hands, you're going to be able to affect the outcome for the communities that we're in. Your careers are going to be very exciting with the fact that the majority of them you're going to be tinkering with not just AI but quantum AI, right? In terms of using net new hardware in order to vastly accelerate the development of these models and the amount of data that can go into them to infer all sorts of interesting discoveries that are impossible today. And so, look, I'm hopeful. I think the sky's the limit for your careers to affect every nook and cranny of our environment in every industry you can think of, to better everybody's lives, not just here, but as we have plenty also in many other nations as well. So I'm looking forward to exploring these themes with you in the second half of our discussion here.
Awesome. No, that was amazing, Igor. Thank you for the presentation. Thinking like going through it and reflecting a little bit, I think STEM as a creative vehicle, that's a very interesting approach. And I feel like as like a builder and a technologist in general, like that's definitely like the introduction, right? It's always about like building and just like imagining the possibilities. And I think it was really cool how you shared like the anecdotes from your childhood and how you got started with it. But then I guess sticking with the youth, right? I think thinking about accessibility to artificial intelligence is really important as well, right? Like we don't want to cause undue harm to people, right? And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how do we tackle bias and just making sure that the algorithms that we design are interpretable and also safe.
Yeah, look, yeah, that's a lot harder to do in on the consumer product side, right? In the enterprise scenarios, it's a lot harder to tackle. I'm sorry, a lot easier to tackle that because extractive AIs are going to be essentially giving answers from an enterprise's body of knowledge. Whereas if you look at things like Alexa and Siri and the like, they have to be giving answers from the totality of knowledge out there. This is why people are really worried about GPT-3 and similar, large scale language models that are what, we thought GPT-3 was impressive with 175 billion parameters, and now the new one that Google announces, what, 175 billion, and the new one from Google is 1.5 trillion parameters. But all these things are doing is hoovering things up, right? It's like a glorified autocomplete in some ways if you think about this natural language generation. Now, here's the problem: what are they hoovering up? Well, they're hoovering up Wikipedia. That's fine. That's easy. They're hoovering up, websites like NIH's and CNN and things like that. Okay, those are fine. But then what happens when it hoovers up Breitbart? What happens when it hoovers up Parler? What happens when it hoovers up Gab and things like that? And so, even if we say, okay, only 1% of Americans are shall we say, not the best of fellow citizens, that's still 3 million people, for God's sakes, and 3 million people's thoughts blended into this stuff. And then they're like, well, you can try to remove them, but then they're like, oh my gosh, we're not fairly represented in terms of opinions and things like that. So it's a tricky problem, to figure out, what's a good cell and what's a cancer cell. I mean, that's not an easy solution.
Yeah, and I think as we like transition, like you talked about, first it was about accessibility, and we've gone to ubiquity, right? And so
Right.
managing that, this access is very cool to have, but it's also it's a responsibility, right?
Yeah, I think one of the neat things that you just said is, look, a lot of times, what you see, in Silicon Valley is a very Pontius Pilate view of technology, right? Where they wash their hands of it. I created this hammer, and this hammer can be used in a couple different ways, but it's for the user to decide, right? Whether they're going to be Ted Bundy and bonk people over the head with this hammer and become a serial killer, or they're going to be like Jimmy Carter, actually creating a habitat for humanity with this tool as well. And that's where you see a lot of the debate around, Section 230 and similar laws, and everybody screaming for regulation because they affect disinformation and they affect election outcomes. Even if you're only affecting this by plus or minus 1 or 2%, when you look at how close the margins are for elections, including what all of you witnessed firsthand down in Georgia, it doesn't take much, to nudge people in one direction or another. And by the way, that's just our social media platforms, without even, counting in, external adversaries trying to drift in one direction or another, or even if they don't really care about the outcome in terms of who wins our elections, just the fact that, we start sideward glances, in our fellow citizens and stuff like that, and just start thinking about us not as a United States, but that it's urban versus rural, or white versus black, or male versus female, or immigrant versus versus native. It's this thing that just starts tearing at the cohesion that we need, um, where the melting pot was what allowed us to do amazing things. If I look at the names of many of the people that are in this broadcast as well, I mean, our parents and our grandparents and our great grandparents came from all sorts of different countries and were welcomed here. And sure, in the first one or two generations, it was really hard. But then we started, making a name for ourselves. There were people brought here against their will, for God's sakes, and it took generations for them to even have a hint of being able, to have, the opportunities that many others were afforded as well. So it's not something that can be solved easily.
Yeah, and definitely too. I mean, I'm a son of immigrant parents, and so like that also it's very true that first of all different opportunities are offered to different people, and that's also something that needs to be addressed within society. And it's also not something that might not necessarily be solved with artificial intelligence, right? Because we at the end of the day it's going to be people who are designing these algorithms, right? And so these all these different divisions that you mentioned, we're also encoding these biases, whether it's intentional or not sometimes, right?
Yeah. Okay. So here's an interesting one. So I was working a while back. I was working with a graduate student, and he said, "Hey, I think with things like AI assistants, right? So Siris and Alexas and Cortanas and things like that, you um, you can create imperceptible biases, right, from linguistics turns of phrases, just changing certain words that will appear very innocent to you and to your ear, actually cause a marble to fall down a different direction in your brain, right? Very, very imperceptible. And not to everybody, just enough to nudge 1 or 2% extra people to think somebody's good or bad or questionable, right? And so us as a community, we're really interested in that type of research because we want to understand where those biases may show up. And guess what we're going to do? Wash our hands and try to make it as neutral as possible to make sure that we present facts. We present facts on Wikipedia, we present facts here, we present facts there. Okay. So that's what we do from an intellectual standpoint. And then you have certain politicians that get up on stage that hate us. They hate us for genders. They hate us for race. They hate us for being immigrants. They hate us for being intellectuals. They hate us for thinking about scientific methods and the like. And so then people like me start scratching our heads and saying, "Why the bleep do we have to be neutral? Maybe we should be putting biases in order to clean these people out of the public sphere and stuff like that." And yet we always fall back to being decent. That no, that's not fair. The people that that the electorate, people should have a choice, should always have a choice, and we're supposed to be presenting unbiased information. But don't think that that's not hard, to stay neutral. It
Right. No,
absolutely is.
that's a very interesting discussion of like who gets to make the rules, right? And there's a huge discussion I think about the responsibility that's placed on the creators. Like I'm thinking about I watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix, and that was
Mhm.
also a huge discussion there about, who actually gets to make these rules over what is and what isn't allowed. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Yeah, and like I said, you guys actually will be the ones making the rules because you will be captaining all of these organizations in the future as well, and that's going to be one of the hardest decisions that all of you will have to make, which is, do you stay neutral, or do you have to take a more defensive posture, right? Where people say, well, you know what, in Nazi Germany, we sure wish people were essentially trying to unravel the emerging powers that be. It's a no-win scenario. Honestly, it's a Kobayashi Maru example for those of you that are Star Trek fans.
Yeah. I'm wondering now, can you talk a little bit about Pryon and the work that you guys are doing there? Because I'm sure not all of our attendees have context.
Sure. So Pryon was actually the code name of the thing that became the Alexa engine. So in my last startup was called Yap. Ridiculous name. We had no idea what to call our startup. And so the dog barked, and we said, "Oh, we'll call we'll call the company Yap." There you go. What color company color should we choose? And we looked at the dog again. It was a Labrador that was strangely orange colored. So it wasn't a yellow lab. It looked like an orange lab. And so we're like, okay, orange color and Yap, and the first logo will look like a dog. So that's how we started the last company. And in there, our R&D team started developing an engine, and they codenamed it Pryon. And yes, it was a play on word for the prion protein that caused mad cow disease. I can tell you the in joke, which is this: because it's a machine learning platform that essentially did unsupervised training. The way that the prion protein causes mad cow disease, it's cows unfortunately eating pieces of dead cows. That's why cannibals tend to also get that disease. In those islands. And so we knew that our AI was eating its own output to train itself. And so they decided to call it Pryon, as a play on word between Prion and the fact that the head of our research grid, his first name was Ryan. So I ended up reusing the name for this company. Now, what does this company do? Okay, in very simple terms, one of the things that I was agitated about is the fact that all of us now at home and in our cars and what have you have these natural AI experiences so that we can do news, weather, sports, music, and things of that sort. But inevitably, when all of you, go to your workplace, you know what you're going to see? Dusty old Salesforce consoles and SAP consoles and Oracle consoles and IBM consoles, and you're going to say, "What the bleep? Why can't I just yell at Alexa to wake me up, or yell at a Siri to play a certain piece of music, or yell at a Facebook TV device to call my mom?" And yet here I am having to press 82 different buttons and go to different committees and data science squads and stuff like that in order to get an answer. How many ice cream cones did we sell when it was 73 degrees out? And so when I saw that, I'm like, okay, I have to solve this problem too now at work, because I don't want to read thousands of emails. I don't want to read tens of thousands of documents. I don't want to visit 100,000 websites. I just want to ask a question and get an answer a second later. Now, things at work are different than things at home. At home, each one of us typically buys into a homogeneous ecosystem, right? We become Apple fans, or we become Google fans, or Amazon fans, and we essentially buy into this homogeneous ecosystem with movies, music, and those types of experiences. At work, the DNA is far more complex. These companies, and many times, were born out of mergers and acquisitions, and so they have bits and pieces of IBM and Oracle and Salesforce and SAP and Microsoft and all sorts of different things. And so this AI is more complex because it has to essentially hoover in this information from all of these different applications. Then you have to think about any sort of regulatory laws, security, administration, manageability of this information, to still have that unified AI experience that feels like what you have at home in 1 second, but it has to essentially sift in structured, semi-structured, and unstructured knowledge, top to bottom, allow experts to verify some of this information because of the very important decisions that people are going to be making. In some cases, buying or selling securities, making decisions on whether or not they should be hiring certain people or dismissing them, making credit decisions, right? All of these more serious things. At home, the worst thing that will ever happen to Alexa is you oversleep your your alarm clock. It's the margin for error is different at work.
Right. So you're delivering this, AI knowledge management assistant,
Mhm.
right? And so how does it, I guess, work in? Because you kind of mentioned, right, you have, when as larger companies, pull in acquisitions, you start mixing in the different stacks and whatnot. And
Mhm.
so how do you see your solution kind of integrating and being able to, it seems like it acts like as not just the glue, but also to be able to, take action when you ask it to.
Yeah, so look, AI typically does three things well, right? It does knowledge access, it does analytics well, and it does decision support. So decision support, I think, is more in the future. It's hard, right? So it's like putting a pizza and a salad in front of you and saying, write a computer program to decide whether you eat the pizza or salad. I mean, that's hard. It sounds like a simple problem, that it's actually difficult, because then you're like, okay, well, what do I need? Well, do I need an Apple Watch that's telling me your current nutrients inside of your body? Well, that doesn't really exist. How do I tell? Well, now I need all the data for everything that you've consumed in the last week, in the last month, in the last year, to figure certain thing out, biometrics and things like that. So, solving pizza versus salad is actually a lot harder than it sounds, right? Maybe not at your guys' ages um, and capabilities yet, but when you're older, it does become a harder problem. But no, I mean, decision supports, and then analytics, right? Entity extraction, topic clustering, and the like is where that falls in. And knowledge access is literally, um, tell me at what pressure should I be setting this boiler if you're some sort of field technician, and things of that sort. And each one of those three categories has structured, semi-structured, and unstructured information. If you think about structured, imagine this. I can ask you a natural language question, for you to look something up in a table, for you to look something up in a spreadsheet, for you to look something. That's really hard for a machine to do, right? So natural language to SQL. How do I say something, but it actually emits code and then goes ahead and pulls something up? Natural language to Sparkle, right? And things of that sort. These are all difficult problems. And here's the other thing. You're saying, well, all right, how about unstructured knowledge? Well, unstructured knowledge, when it ingests PDF files and Word files and things like that, as humans, I can open up a benefit plan, a dental benefit plan booklet, and read pages upon pages and remember that, do we cover anesthesia or not, is actually negated by the very first sentence in that whole 4-page section, where it says everything that shows up in the next 4 pages is not covered. Well, you know how hard it is for an AI to figure that out. So we're still, as Bezos says, first pitch, first inning for these style of technologies. And all we're going to be doing is essentially chiseling away at these problems. All of you are going to have lifetime employment. So that at least is good from that standpoint, just like I will, and you will, and probably your successors will as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it segues really interestingly into something that you mentioned earlier in your presentation, that managing the mess of applications. And so, analytics is good, decision support is good. And so we will see more applications of artificial intelligence there next. But more specifically, I guess, where do you see what domains do you specifically see the application of AI going to in the next, I mean, we're early on into this year, and I'm sure we're going to continue to see many more advancements, and I guess going forward.
Oh, goodness gracious. It's literally everywhere. That's the problem, right? So look, we just announced in the last week. So Georgia Tech is actually an investor in our company through Engage Ventures. Yeah, which is a great team that has been working with us since the beginning. I want to make an AI so simple to use that all you have to do to train it is drag and drop a PDF file into it. That's it. Boom. Hey, AI, I want you to learn this. Boom. Throw a document in it, and suddenly it knows that. Sort of like that lady who closed her eyes and learned how to fly a helicopter in the Matrix. That's what I wanted. I didn't want to make ML ops, right? As you all have heard the term. I want mom ops. I want something so simple that my own artist mother can train an AI, right? That's how you democratize access to AI. A lot of the things that all of you worked on this weekend, only people like you that are highly trained at a top tier school will know how to use those types of tools, right? But I think the community is going to be better off once we can get it into everybody's hands. I want somebody in the cafeteria being able to use it, in the mailroom. I want dock workers being able to use it. I want nurses to be able to use it. I want pilots to be able to use it. I literally want it in every nook and cranny. And here's why. For the exact opposite reason that you just asked me the question. You're like, hey, where is it going to fit? I'd rather not answer that question. I'd rather say that each one of them is a subject matter expert in a different area, and they're going to surprise us with the use of the technology. So I'd rather, show up with a blank canvas, paintbrush, and a whole mess of paint. And the next thing I know, they'll end up creating something that none of us ever knew before. Guess why? Because we don't work every day at an airport. We don't work every day in a hospital. We don't work every day in the environments that they work in. And so it's going to be an absolute thrill when all of us create tools, hand it over to them, and then see, where their innovative spirit takes them.
I think that's a great analogy. And again, speaking back to the very beginning, like the creativity and the artistry, I think it'd be very cool. And I like your take on it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's awesome, because then you know what's interesting about that is then you're not viewed as siloed people, right? You're not viewed as special priests and priestesses that know some arcane, spells and things of that sort. Now you become members of a community where people want multidisciplinary teams. Look, my current chief technology officer, who helped stand up Watson division at IBM, he's been doing AI since 1981. For God's sakes, he was directly mentored by the fellow who invented speech recognition, Fred Jelinek of John Hopkins fame, and he still carries the letter of him being offered that job in '81. He took a diligence call, from a big customer, a potential customer of mine last time, and they said, "Hey, Igor's company claims that they solved this problem." Right, and David was like, "There's no way they solved this problem. This is impossible." Because he's doing transcription on narrow band audio and stuff like that. That's not a solved problem. Not at that accuracy level. Years later, he's like, "How the heck did you do it? You obviously solved it. You beat Google in that accuracy for those use cases by almost a decade." And I'm like, David, look at what I had. I had artists, I had musicians, I had biologists, I had a multidisciplinary team. And even though I came out of IBM, I didn't tell them that this was an impossible problem. We just started working on it, right? And we ended up solving it in our own way. I had some of the original people that worked on the iPod, that worked with Apple, to stand up that amazing device early on. So, look, what I would say is run in the opposite direction of anybody that you essentially propose. Hey, I want to do this thing in healthcare. Hey, I want to do this thing in defense. Hey, I want to do this thing in industry. Hey, I want to figure out these windmills, to not harm animals. Hey, I want to build an electric car. Hey, I want to do this, for space or satellites. Anybody that tells you it's not possible, immediately just do your negative training and just set them aside. It may not be possible that day. You're going to have to work on it elliptically. You're going to have to work on it in a nonlinear way. But you could eventually get there. And maybe you haven't crossed paths with the right folks. That would essentially bring a missing vegetable to the stone soup.
Makes a lot of sense. And I think it's really cool how you found that success with, bringing in people from multiple disciplines. And I mean, it makes sense too, because you have the unfair advantage of so many of these different perspectives. And that's what helps you succeed, right?
Yeah, and like you said before, right? A lot of the folks that were involved this weekend have an entrepreneurial spirit in some ways, and if you go to large organizations, keep that, become entrepreneurs. One of the things that Bezos said that that was the difference between small companies and large companies is, in a large company, 99 people can say yes to your project, and all it takes is one person to say no, and then they set it aside and not do it. In startups, 99 investors can say no, and then once one says yes, you're off to the races. You get to go try that experiment. You try to adapt it. You try to essentially keep turning the lockpick, if you will, until you're able to unlock that, get to the next milestone, and then you end up pitching investors again. And sooner or later, years later, it becomes this obvious thing that was this overnight success. So
It's really funny how you bring up that example because we just had a tech talk from Emerson Global, and the director of software there, he spoke about how they manage they strive to keep a startup culture despite having, an $18 billion company with, not avoiding like the bureaucracy when they can, and just being able
Right.
to work on things, and not be limiting to specific technology stacks, or whatever might be stopping people from building something great. And so yeah, I think it's very interesting that you mentioned it. I think it's very apt to say.
Yeah. So look, when you see Amazons, when you see, why didn't IBM didn't get cloud? Of course they got cloud. There were some really smart people in there trying to push that. Well, they didn't get AI early. Well, of course they got AI early, but there's certain things that were hindering their ability to take, some of these things, to market. And so, water finds a way around a rock. So either, if once you guys are in positions of influence, either you move the rock out of the way, or your best and brightest are going to go, flow somewhere else.
So I've got one more question for you, and then I want to wrap up and give
Mhm.
people an opportunity to find out how to how to contact you, how to learn more, whatever. So you said a little while ago that having this access, having it be so ubiquitous everywhere. When I asked you about applications, like giving people access, giving them carte blanche, letting them build is going to be the key to democracy, right? And so, what does that also, you think, in turn, if we literally make it so that it's anybody can have it, that it's also going to be used fairly? Like, I know there's always, you said, a small population, right, that will
Yep.
not, but do you see it as, if we give everybody the keys to the kingdom, it will sort of like filter out in some way the negative, the bad actors?
No, it won't. That's actually, I have to commend you on the question. The last time I heard this question, I gave it was giving a talk at the Citadel, and I was asked a similar question. Look, the good news is if they're working on your platform and they're doing nefarious things with it, you know where the off button is. So that's at least the check and balance that exists there. Now, of course, the regulators and the government has to allow you to be able to push the off button, and for some of these uses as well. And and by the way, that's a reason for all of you to be part of this environment, is the fact that you get to then control, tend, and nurture how this technology gets rolled out, instead of being a passive player. And look, I think, you, if you think about, it takes a village to raise each and every one of you, right? You have the opportunity for the education that you've experienced to date, because people are going to be trusting you with those decisions, when you're ready, and just be responsible for it. Don't be the one, Georgia Tech graduate that everybody's annoyed in their class because you're making, an AI holographic version of Gab or Parlor. Don't be that person.
Right. And I think with the off button, we all experienced that several weeks ago too, with the Twitter fallout and everything like that. It's like, who gets to push that button? I think it's important that it exists, but then you could stir up a whole new
Sure.
controversy, from the electorate over, who gets control over that.
I know,
Right.
and it's a Kobayashi Maru. It's a no-win scenario, right? It's like, had he not done it, and then on the inauguration, more people would have died, and all sorts of nonsense, would have happened. Then what people would have said, well, why didn't you do anything? So it's a no-win. It's a no-win scenario.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Igor. I wanted, again, like I mentioned, I'm sure we have a good amount of people who who might want to learn more,
Sure.
or kind of even continue the conversation further. So, how can people reach out to you? What channels to follow, or what do we
Yeah.
do?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. Obviously, just look for my first and last name. Easy to get connected with me there, or I'm on Twitter. You can just shoot me a message or questions on that as well. While I have a Clubhouse account, I haven't quite figured out if I need to be blithering 24/7.
I'd love to get you on a clubhouse room sometime. My co-founder and I, he especially, he loves getting into rooms and talking about everything. And yeah, that'd be fun to do sometime.
Yeah, so stay in touch. I'm on Twitter. I'm on, like I said, I'm on LinkedIn. Happy to share more. But you guys are doing great work here, and look, in some cases, like I said, this is wargaming, and don't think like what you did this weekend was all playtime, because I can tell you, even in very serious places like the Pentagon, what do? Play, work over and over and over again. So by the time that you encounter scenarios, you will encounter brand new scenarios that you've never seen before. But half of them, you're going to be able to infer and extrapolate based on the experiences like this weekend. That's why they're so valuable. But thanks for having me, and stay in touch.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, Igor. Awesome. Okay. Thank you all so much. So should be starting with the Hacker Expo in just several minutes. So at this point, I believe that in the Expo section on Hopin, you all just you can find your team name, the one that you submitted your project with on DevPost, and at this point, you can go and click into your booth. And judging should be starting shortly in a few minutes. We're going to take a short break on stage, but the plan is to come back live with some of our VIP panel judges, and we'll be inviting teams from the expo to come join us on stage live and do a live presentation, in addition to the judging that's going to be happening as between 1 and 3 o'clock Eastern time, so 3 minutes from now, and then for the next 2 hours. That's the plan. If anybody has a question or needs to reach out to an organizer, please use the Discord. We're going to be monitoring it. And yeah, I'm hoping that you all have awesome pitches crafted, are ready to present and share. And yeah, we'll have Hacker Expo. And following that, we will have the closing ceremony back here on the Hopin stage around 3:15 p.m. Eastern time. But yeah, thank you all so much. And we will see you back here super soon. Happy presenting.